Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good wherever you are in the world. My name is Kevin Kerr. I'm the founder and creator of Arrowhead 3 and the Story War Academy. Welcome to this weekly webinar. This is the third of our series on the 3 tests of a winning sales message. We'll be pulling content from the actual Story War Academy to share with you some of the things as we go through today's webinar. But first, let's go through a quick review of what we've covered the last 3 weeks. So week number 1, we talked about the 3 tests of a winning sales message. Number 1 is it must be important or emotional to the buyer. If you don't pass this one, nothing else matters if the customer doesn't care. Secondly, it has to be different from the competitors or differentiate or die, as we talked about last week. This week, it's going to be credible and sticky. But as I started thinking about it, I think I'm going to take sticky and I'm going to push that one off to November and December because it's got a lot of stuff in it, and you'll see why I pushed that one off. So today we're going to handle just credible. So why is it important to have a winning sales message? Because when you have a winning sales message, that means you're going to have bigger deals. You're going to have bigger deals in less time. You're going to have more repeat deals. You're going to be able to upsell, and you're going to be able to cross-sell because the customer understands the value of your product. But first, a small correction. Last week, I told the story of an emergency safety valve sold by one of my clients. Well, as luck would have it, I had one of the executives from that client in the audience watching last week's webinar, and he corrected me. The SCSSV, I thought, was the self-contained subsurface safety valve, but he corrected me and said that no, it's the surface-controlled subsurface safety valve. So I beg his forgiveness for missing that one. However, he did not correct the results that his team got, and you can see all the cool things that happened to their team as a result of that. Okay, so today, all right, so let's assume for a moment that we're going to put your sales message on trial in front of a judge and jury, and your job is to convince them to take the next step in the sales cycle. As you know, in a B2B deal, there's many steps, not just a one and done. There's lots of steps that we need to do. And the great thing about having a great sales message is you can adapt it so that you can go from step to step and quicken the pace. All right. However, in this courtroom, the times are a little bit different. You will only have 60 seconds to present your solution, your benefits, your features, and any evidence that you might have. Oh, and on the other side, you're going to have competition. And they will also have 60 minutes to present their benefits, features, and their evidence for their product, or perhaps even against your product. So I want you to assume for this particular idea that you've already got a good idea of what the benefits are and a good idea of what features you're going to use. But where you're really fuzzy is evidence. So the big question is, do you have enough evidence to convince, or is your solution going to be sent to walk away free? All right, so let's take a slightly different perspective on the 3 tests of a winning sales message. Got done before the buzzer, great. Okay, test number 1, it has to be important or emotional to the buyer. And we know that is typically a benefit. And if it needs to be different from the competition, that's typically going to be some kind of a feature, a differentiating feature. When it comes to being credible, well, that's where we start looking at evidence or proof points. Evidence and proof points. Notice there's 3 aspects that we're looking at. So we sometimes talk about evidence and proof points. Today I want to just simplify it and use just the term proof points. It'll make life a lot easier. So in the Story War Academy, when we handle this lesson, we go into a little more detail. Here's a segment from that. The idea that if you give your buyer's head enough proof points
their heart will follow. It just doesn't fly. And if you sell them on an emotional appeal alone, you'll soon be beaten by somebody who persuaded the buyer's heart and head. So far, we've covered how to make your message compelling to your buyer, so it's emotional to them.
So, proof points. Proof points are a great way so that your brain can be happy with your heart. Remember, people buy on emotion and they justify with facts. They need both of those things in sync in order to make a faster decision to buy. All right, so let's go to real world. In the olden days, I used to sell a product which was a supply chain optimization process and software. And this was to factories that made complicated or products that had many different components that had to be brought together from different areas. We had benefits, we had features, and we had proof points. Let's be more specific. One of the key benefits that our buyers were looking for were obviously reduced cost. And we would show, well, we can reduce your cost better than others because we're the only ones that have this thing called MUPI. It was a French acronym that I can't remember, but I remember that it had to do with algorithm synthesis. Algorithm synthesis, how would we prove that? Well, we went to particular metrics. They knew that they were going to reduce cost if we could show them that we were going to lower their inventory and we could lower their WIP or their work in process and at the same time increase their on-time performance. So we would either run a test sample there or we would show an example of how it worked for another client. Not everybody in the organization, though, jived with numbers. Some of them didn't speak factory, but they had to make decisions, and they were more metaphor type people. Sometimes you have a value benefit that just doesn't work well with numbers. So what we would do is we would use the same benefit, same feature, but what we would do is we would tell the story of the steering wheel. What is that? Well, very simply put, when you're driving down a mountainous road, when you turn your steering wheel, notice your car turns at the same time and you're safe on the road. But what would happen if you turned the steering wheel and it took your car 30 seconds in order for it to respond? There was that kind of latency. You'd be all over the mountain, okay? Well, that's the same thing that happens in supply chains. When something happens down here in the supply chain, many times they can't see it till much later on, and it's too late to make any changes. But with our MUPI or algorithm synthesis, we tighten that. So when you turn the steering wheel to your supply chain, it immediately, you see that, you have that visibility right away. We sold a lot of supply chain optimization because our sales guys could do either one, do the metrics or do the metaphor. Okay, so let's now look at specifically what are the different types of proof points you might use to make your sales message more credible. Well, first and foremost are numbers. Numbers are the magic currency of proof points. It's the most flexible thing you're going to have, and you're going to be able to show numbers, charts, graphs, statistics, outputs, returns, results, all kinds of stuff. However, numbers can be a challenge. We'll get to that in just a minute. But here's an example from the Story War Academy. This goes back to my days when I was doing some work with Siemens in their telecommunications group. They used to have 75 slides that you had to watch. So we worked with them and said, can you do it tighter? So they came up with 6 numbers. Watch how they took 75 slides and brought it down to 6 powerful numbers.
I know a lot of you already know about our company, but let me give you 6 numbers that shows our commitment to the telecommunications space. Our company has been in business 160 years. And what that means to you is we're not going away tomorrow. We're here for the long haul. We're not going to strand you with equipment you can't use anymore. 120 countries we have offices in. What that means to you is wherever you have people, we'll have local folks there to help serve you. 110. Last year, our revenues we're just over $110 billion. And what that means to you is we're the market leader, which makes us the safe and reliable choice for your telecommunication needs. 10% of all revenue goes back into our R&D. And what that means to you is you're always going to get an innovative product that's been well tested and proven. One of every 2 calls on the planet travels through one of our switches. And what that means to you is we've seen it all. We fixed all the problems the other guys haven't even thought of yet. Now, let's talk about what your telecommunication needs are.
Oh, I love that. They could just nail that in 6 numbers. And they could do it fast. Now imagine all your salespeople, if they had 5 or 6 numbers like that, that were just in their pocket, they could go up to a whiteboard or over a Zoom whiteboard and just say, hey, I know you don't want to sit through a PowerPoint presentation. Let me just tell you a little bit about our company. And then finish each one with, and what this means to you is, okay, so it's a challenge. What numbers do you use and what numbers do you not use? Here's another segment from the Story War Academy. You know what numbers to use and not use. I think the best advice came from a participant at a conference on international taxation that I was speaking at in Vancouver, British Columbia. The topic of ideal taxation came up, and from the very back of the room, a Brazilian man stood up and interrupted my speech by saying, the ideal tax, I can't do a Brazilian accent, the ideal tax is like a Brazilian bikini. Now here's where the odd part comes in. He had one with him and he held it up and said, the ideal tax is one that covers just the bare necessities. And I would say that is the best advice for what numbers to use to support your message. Cover the bare necessities of your message. Okay, and it's a great team activity to just say, okay, guys, I want you each to come up with, 3 or 4 or 5 numbers that are going to help tell our story, and then brainstorm with them and have each one of them present back all the different numbers and then call through until you find just the right one. That's one of the pressure tests in the Story War Academy that we have the teams do. And I'll be there to help coach you with that. All right. These next ones I'm going to kind of go through fast because I want to get through some other things, and this is just a webinar where I'm introducing you to something. So the second one is a satisfied customer. If you have a satisfied customer, there's a lot of things you can do with that one. You can talk about pleasant implementation or word of mouth. Man, you get the customer talking about your product to others or giving referrals, golden. That's better than anything. And there's also testimonials and case studies. There's so much you can do when you have a satisfied customer implementation to work with. Next is recognized leadership. There may be lots of different ways that you're recognized as a leader in your space. Find those and then just work those in to your sales message. Things like favorable reviews by users or influencers or analysts. Or perhaps it has something to do with the market share in the broader space or a niche space, or awards and certifications that you might have that are important to the customer. Partnerships, either with other vendors, or you may have showcase clients that are just golden that says, hey, you're the people. And there's also analyst reports. Those are also another great thing to leverage in your sales messaging. After recognized leadership is one of my favorite, and that is attribute ownership. You remember last week when we talked about differentiate or die, we borrowed from Jack Trout's book, Differentiate or Die, where he talked about the 4 tough ways to differentiate and the 8 better ways to differentiate. One of the most flexible of those 8 is attribute ownership. What does that mean? That means you've chosen a mountain, you and your team have climbed it, you've gone through all the hard work to get to the top, and you've planted your flags and you've written all your names on it. You've claimed a space. That's what it is. You may say, we're going to have the best mushrooms in Northern California, or it has to do with something else, but there's a certain attribute that you're going to own. When you do that, it says that you are the authority. Also, that it shows your commitment and your vision to that particular attribute or trait. And if you've got social proof, customers backing you up on that, saying, yep, we're not the ones saying it, but the customer's saying it. Wow, that's even better. And here's the thing. When you have confidence in a certain area and you can prove it, it's contagious to the customer. They love that, and they become some of your best salespeople. All right, let's go back to the customer we talked about last week, the one that did the safety valves that I had to do some correction on. Well, one of the traits that they narrowed in on was reliability. And sometimes it's very difficult to prove credibility with just numbers. Here's what they did.
Let's assume for a moment you're trying to sell that all-familiar emergency safety valve to an oil and gas company with big offshore rigs. Your main value is reliability when it really matters. And you have a boatload of testing data, but you know that won't mean much to your buyer. So how would you make the idea of reliability when it really matters stick with your buyer? Here's how some of the actual salespeople won their story war. Our product shares a critical trait with these 4 people or things: a heart surgeon, a parachute, a matchmaker, and a suspension bridge. What do they all share? Well, when it comes to reliability, when it really matters, you want and need the best. Would you hire a heart surgeon who said, I can give you 80% of what you need for half the price? Or would you risk many lives putting in a suspension bridge that was not engineered to the highest standards? The same is true with our safety valve. It costs a little bit more, but you can be confident that no one else tests their valves to the same high pressures or extreme temperatures that we do.
So imagine how the customer goes on. They go on repeating your metaphors or whichever one they like. All right, next proof point, demonstrations, demos. Wow, I love these ones. I've done thousands of these when I sold software in Washington, D.C. I love demos. Demos, you can be showing your product. Wow, it can do that. Yeah. Or maybe it's a proof of concept if you don't have a product available yet. Or white papers. Maybe you're doing a webinar or a video, kind of like what I'm doing here, where I'm showing webinar and video. This is a demonstration partly of my product. And also visuals or pictures, sometimes just on the back of a napkin. One of the lessons we teach in the Story War Academy is whiteboarding. Imagine being able to draw on the back of a napkin your solution, what the customer's world would be like without and with your solution. How powerful is that? Imagine what credibility that does for the salesperson in front of the customer when they can draw out something like that on their own. Okay, money back guarantee. Well, this reverses the risk. Taking it back on your hands, it shows that you have trust in your quality, in your product, and you're willing to put a commitment behind it. Next one is the buyer's experience. Okay, this is kind of the gotcha moment. You could do excellent on all your messaging. You could have an A+ message, which is defensible, it's important to the customer, it's differentiated. But if you blow it on the buyer's experience, it doesn't matter how good your message was. You have to treat them with kid gloves, and they will treat that as credibility. That's beyond the scope of this particular webinar. We get into that a lot later on when we start talking about spikes, words, voice, body, objection reframes, and listening and things like that. But right now, I just want you to think about the buyer's experience, how important that is. Okay, so let's go back and let's take another look at the 3 tests of a winning message, and we're going to nuance it a little bit more. So, what is it? Important or emotional to the buyer? We look at benefits. Differentiation, we're looking at features, differentiating features. We want credible, we're looking at proof points. Now, another way to look at this, you'll notice there's a pattern here. is to look at benefits as why would the customer want this? Features typically about what it does differently. Proof points are more about how it's done. Another way of looking at it, one of my favorites, is what it means to the customer, what it does differently, and what it is. You've probably seen this ad nauseum, guys, those of you that have been with me for a while. If I take my cell phone and I just say, okay, what are the three ways I could look at it? I could look at it, what it is, what it does, and what it means. If I say what it is, well, it's a cell phone. It's got, look at the componentry. It's got Gorilla Glass inside. There's an accelerometer. There's a leather case, some buttons on the side. If I raise it up and say, what does it do? Well, it does email. It's a web browser. It has a camera. It can play, I can play games with it. But if I raise it up yet again to what it means, well, now that's connecting me with my family whenever I'm away. Which of those three is most important? Typically the means. But the means all by itself is empty because you want to see what it does and how it does it. What is it that does that? That's the is, does, mean. You'll notice there are three elements here. Why three? Well, three, when you look at trend analysis or patterns, three is the minimum number you need to establish trends and patterns. And I like to think of it, it's like a tripod or a three-legged chair or table. You need at least three legs in order to have stability. In fact, it's one of the most stable platforms when you have three. And our brains are a lot like that. We like things that are simple. So whenever you start thinking about the three test, I want you to just drum it into your head. Emotional, different, incredible. And that's going to be a big help to you as you move on. Okay, so let's start to wrap things up. I talked about last week how having the right sales message is a lot like bringing a gun to a knife fight. That reminds me of a video. You know, Harrison Ford just thought of that off the cuff. That's not how it was in the script or the screenplay. Okay, so what's next? Next week, we're going to add a bonus webinar, not just three, but we're going to add a fourth one. As I started going through these three webinars, I started to see something that we didn't call out specifically. We illustrated, but didn't call it out, and that was contrast. If I could teach you one thing, it's contrast. Contrast is the secret of demonstrating value. And we'll go into that about camouflage and standing out and all that kind of stuff. So next steps for you. If you think that you'd like to know more about the Story War Academy and how we might serve you, feel free to go to this link. I'll send you the link in the email tomorrow and schedule time on my calendar. One of the benefits of coming to the webinar is you can schedule a slot of time with my calendar and you and I'll visit about you and your team. Or if you just want to take a look at a video that goes into the Story War Academy in more detail, I'll also have that link. And we'll send the link for today's webinar and next week's registration. Okay? So, Q&A. Folks, go ahead and hit the Q&A if you've got a particular question or scenario you'd like us to talk about as a group. And I will just look at here, see what you have. We have a new product and no proof points. Good. It's a great question. So what happens when you don't have proof points? Well, you are selling a vision. You're selling an aspirational sell. So if you have no product to show, what is it? Well, things like proof of concept. You're looking for a particular kind of buyer, a trailblazer, somebody that wants to leave a legacy. It's not your It's not typically your safe driver unless you're going to do something for them no one else can. So you sell the vision. You show demonstrations, and you probably ask them to work with you as you go through the process. And there's typically some give and take there. Okay, next question. Why should I, I'll just say what they said. Why should I pay for the Story War Academy if I can watch your webinars free? That wouldn't be nice to me. All right. What we're doing here in the webinars, I'm only giving you a taste, a bit of it, but I want to give you some of the best ones. When you do the Story War Academy, you're signing up for 8 very specific lessons that build on each other. Each one is 90 minutes long, and you can do it with your team one a week. Each one has about 30 to 40 minutes of instruction like what I'm giving you now. And then the rest of the time is a pressure test. It's an exercise where everybody works and then they share their results in front of each other and then they coach each other. And if you're working with me, I'll be there to coach with you. Okay? I'll be there remotely or live if you want. But that's one of the values I will provide for you. I love to coach, and I think I'm okay at doing it. All right, next question. Are there multiple levels to benefits or features? Yes, that's great thought. Yeah, I am overly simplifying messaging here because I want you to see the main ideas here. But when you talk about benefits, you could be talking about direct benefits or indirect benefits, or time frame wise, immediate to long term. So you need to be thinking about which of these, if you're fishing, which of these is going to catch the fish I want, and then you look for the features underneath that to support it, and then how are you going to prove it? That's where you start. You don't always start down here at your proofs, although you could. All right. So be aware, who are you selling to? And this is especially true in your B2B deals because you have multiple stakeholders that you're selling to. Some people are more financial, other people are more executive, other people deal with more people, or someone's more technical. So you need to know how to take the values and benefits and pick which one, and yet at the same time have harmony among them. That's a key. That's where an arrowhead really comes in handy. All right, last one here. How do you know what proof point goes with each benefit or feature? It's like a chain, okay? Always think about test number 1 first. That's why it's test number 1. What is most important to the buyer? And that's typically where you're looking at what benefit. And that will match up with a needs, pain, or desire. We're going to get into that next week when we start talking about contrast. Once you know that, then you start working down the ladder. What feature helps prove that we do it better? And then what proofs do I need underneath that? And the arrowhead is all about a messaging structure and framework to do just that. If you know your customer well enough, you can start framing it together. That's why you can close bigger deals faster and your customers are happier because you understand their business, their needs, pains, and desires. Okay, great job. Now, last thing. We talked about the importance of the buyer's experience. What happens when you have confident salespeople? Well, that obviously improves the buyer's experience. But when I think about happy salespeople, that reminds me of a video.
I'm the lyrical gangster. Big up the crew in the area. Still love you like that. No, we don't die. Yes, we multiply. Anyone press me here, the fire they sing. Act like you know we go. I know what more don't know. Let's them up and go. Here come the observer. I'm the lyrical
That baby with the mustache.
Big up the crew in the area. Still love you like that. Here come the observer. I'm the lyrical gangster. Excuse me, Mr.
I love that commercial. I love that. It just makes me happy seeing babies dancing around as grown-ups. Guys, thanks so much for being with us today. I hope this was helpful for you. Now go out and make it a great day.